Good morning, everyone. This is Kevin McNew with Quantum Hedging with some early morning discussion about grain markets. Markets on Thursday are a little corrective right now. Beans are off about 7 after rallying after the USDA report, and corn was trying to come back in the last day or so, but we're off for it this morning as well on corn. And corn, really was kind of the strike zone for the USDA report. Just a really big change in some key numbers that really kind of took the corn market to another level, falling in below $4. The numbers, as most of you probably know, were very high yields, very high acres, both surprises in terms of trade expectations. And I thought, and kind of looking at the data, I'm like, wow, this is shocking. When have we seen this big a yield number and this big a acreage number kind of combined in 1 year? And it's actually a fairly rare event. So to kind of quantify how rare this circumstance is we find ourselves in, I've looked at 160 years of U.S. corn acres and yield history. And I wanted to ask the question, how often do we see new record high yields, and also very, very high acres? That's what we've seen this year. We saw, in the August report from USDA, record high yields and the highest corn acres we've seen in well over 30 years. So I put together a little benchmark study, and what this chart shows is yield deviation on the x-axis. On the x-axis is yield deviation versus a 30-year trend, and on the y-axis is how high is the acres that year versus the last 30 years. So a high number on the y-axis means it's high. It's the percentile of where the acres are today versus normal. So 100% means that this yield or this acres this year is the highest we've seen in 30 years, in conjunction with a high yield year. So 160 years of yield history and acreage history from the U.S. What do we know? What do we know is that about 1 in every 4 years, on average, there's a new record high corn yield. So there's roughly 44 crosses on this chart, which represent the 44 times in 160 some years that we have had a new record high yield. And the deviation of that yield in that year is shown on the x-axis. And then we asked the question, in that year when we had a record high yield, where was acres for corn? Was it at the highest point we've seen in the last 30 years? In other words, a high Y value of 100, or is it at the lower end of where the acres have been in the last 30 years? So it'd be a lower Y value. What I want you to notice is that most of the last 30 to 40 years have been, you can see 23, 21, 2017, these kind of numbers kind of right in the middle here. You can see that we were somewhere in the 80th percentile for acres when we set new record high yields. But what you can see is 2025, the mark in red, that's where we printed for USDA. That's the highest acres we've seen in the last 30 years. It's represented by 100 on the y-axis, and also a record yield. It's a little hard to see, but you can see that in recent history, the most recent history where that's happened is 1985. That's 40 years ago. The other gray boxes here, which are way old data, those are in the 1800s. So basically, we've had every 1 in 4 years, we've had a new record high yield. But how many years have we had a record high yield and the highest acres we've seen in 30 years? That's more like 5 in 160 years. So it's very, very rare, and that's where we're at today. So not really a good sign. We'll see where the yield settles out, but right now the market has very little enthusiasm to kind of move to the upside. So I think it's going to be a challenging post growing season for us as farmers and U.S. agriculture with kind of this overhang. So still a lot of things can change, but right now this latest data is not very supportive for sharply higher prices as we kind of close out the growing season. So thanks for tuning in. As always, feel free to reach out to us on quantumhedging.com.